All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's session of Facebook Live here on Wednesday night. This week, we're going to be trying something new. I'm going to be trying an Ask Me Anything, an AMA. And I was hoping to maybe do some different topics on different weeks because basically I'm getting a lot of questions, very general industry questions, and I wanted to give you all an opportunity to ask those of me. I thought it'd be great to break those up into sections so that we can better organize them. But this week, yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit about, again, what it takes to be in the industry, like how you get in, some questions when you start. We have a whole section in our book devoted to this. We have a whole course devoted to this, and it's the last chapter in our book, and it's succeeding in the industry from the Academy of Animated Art classes. So, brief recap for anyone that doesn't know me: my name's Mike. I am a co-founder here at the Academy of Animated Art. I'm also a senior lighting artist at Blue Sky Studios. I've been lighting at Blue Sky for over 11 years now. I've done 10 films, lots of shots, and lots of good stuff. In my time there, I've done a ton of demo reel reviews. I've worked with lots of students. I've done interviews, and I've also gone on recruiting trips. I've worked closely with our recruiting department. We interviewed our head recruiter for our book, Lighting for Animation, and I have a pretty good understanding. We've also interviewed a good friend of mine is the head, or she's a dean at the School of Business at Columbia University here in New York. And her main focus is negotiations, which is going to lead us into our first topic today. So Sarah was the first one to respond to the post, and she asked a question that I know a lot of you are thinking about, and so we'll just hop right in with some salary negotiation stuff. She asks, I've never been good at salary negotiation. Do you do that at every job? I didn't even try to negotiate with the big studios because I felt lucky to be selected. Tips are appreciated. And she mentions that in LA, there are lots of union shops and they do have some salary minimums. So, negotiating. The key to negotiating is a couple things. Number one, you need to understand if you have leverage and if the studio has leverage on you. Usually leverage comes from you might have a couple offers. Maybe you are currently working a job and they're trying to lure you away with a better offer. So you don't necessarily need the position. If you have limited experience, your leverage is going to be less. But the key to negotiation, well, two things. One, always do it. You're not doing them any favors by just taking their first offer. But the one thing about negotiation that you need to realize is that it's something that by the end of it, both parties should feel like they're because it's a give and take, and you want both parties to be happy at the end of it. You don't want anyone to feel like they're taken advantage of. The big thing for you all, if you're just starting in the industry, is to realize that if you, like, especially at a big company, lots of times your only chance to really negotiate your salary is when you start. Every performance review, every pay increase, every promotion is going to be a percentage based on that number. So you want to make sure that when you're coming into a studio to take the time to go ahead and negotiate a good starting salary. The way that I like to do that, and there's no standard, you want to first start with looking at the area that you're going to be living in. What's the cost of living there? And you have to genuinely be honest with yourself about what amount of money you would like, or you genuinely feel like you need to live there. And then since this is a negotiation, whatever offer you put up first, usually they'll go back and forth. So I usually find the number that I would be happy with and then tack on an additional 20% on top of that, and I start from there. If I have to come all the way back down to my number, I'm still happy. But I think a really important thing is to figure out like a number that you won't take below and stick to that. Like, give yourself some worth and don't fall below that. I know lots of people who, because again, this isn't like if you pass on a job opportunity, it's not like you're saying goodbye to them forever. Lots of times I know lots of people who are at companies that have gone through multiple salary negotiations and multiple hiring processes with them. And sometimes it's just like good to know where you are and where they are. And yeah, and then once you have the job, just be happy. Like then you've got your salary in place. You know that you're above the level that you determined in your research would get you there. And then but definitely, and I can say this from outside the industry. I've talked to different business owners who always say that they always anticipate a negotiation when they offer you a salary. So if they offer you X number of dollars and you're like, yeah, sure, great. They're like, whoa, because in their head, there was money left on the table that they were willing to give you. So make sure you kind of go back and forth with them a little bit. Make sure you throw in questions here. And I'm looking at the Facebook chat window, both on my live session and from the previous post before. Hi, Kleber. Hi, Trent. How you guys doing? Okay, Trent, I saw you. Oh, you were responding to Abhishek's. There was another question about salaries, I think, that I wanted to get to. And I just wanted to see. Yeah, okay. Understandable. So yeah. Oh, Trent, you did ask this. So different companies have different structures with regard to junior, mid senior, and senior levels. I understand your ability, both in the negotiation skill level and previous experience, all play a part. What are the appropriate salary brackets for relevant years of experience? I'm going to hedge a lot on these things, and I apologize for that because it's just the way it is. Because negotiating for a job in Vancouver is going to be different than New York versus Europe and things like that. But I'm just going to talk about like my personal experience with these things. I don't know about the in-between one, the junior, mid, and mid-senior. I only know like junior, mid, senior. And in terms of full transparency, I'll just tell you what I feel, what I found in my experience in the animation houses. So generally speaking, a junior artist can make anywhere from 60 to 90,000 a year. Mid levels are usually in the 90 to 110 range. And then seniors are usually like anywhere from like 110 to 140, somewhere in there for jobs in, like, again, New York, LA, San Francisco. I haven't had much experience with Vancouver. And one thing, and I should say this to anybody who's listening in from Europe, although it's very late there, if you are listening live or if you're checking this out later, a friend of mine had this issue when he was negotiating in the US, because I guess in the EU, when you negotiate a salary, you negotiate your net pay. So he was coming over from Sweden, and he had negotiated a salary here in New York and thought that he was going to be like big baller because he thought the number that he was negotiating was going to be his take-home pay. And then he got his first paycheck, and he was actually like in the city, and he was like planning on buying, like renting some like super sweet penthouse. Got his first paycheck and was like, what is this? And then sat down with HR, and they explained to him that, yes, this was your gross pay is what you negotiated. And then you have taxes and Social Security and all that stuff taken out. So he learned that lesson. So I wanted to pass that information along to you too. In terms of experience with junior, mid, senior, it all depends on the company. Generally speaking, those roles generally are tied to salary. So it's just like a way to move up and around, like, and moving from different companies can change your role within that. Like, I know people who were leads at one company who went and started lighting at a different company and had to take a mid-level lighting role because that's just where they hire people in at that company. There is no set number of years experience. There's no, it's more about like what you bring to the table and how much they're willing to pay you. And then that slots you into one of those categories, because most of the time at a studio, everybody gets the same number of shots. It's just the seniors get more complex shots. Therefore they're called seniors, and therefore they're paid a little bit more. So there's that. Yeah, hope that answers your question there. Okay, so Praveen asks, as a lead or lighting supervisor, when one can have a chance to read a script of a movie or TV series, what sort of things should you look for to prevent the problem at a later stage? Thanks. So from an animation standpoint, so I do this when I'm looking at thesis projects, and also when we get the script for films. I'm never like concerned about a particular lighting setup. I'm more concerned about crowds, heavy forests, things like that will lead to big render times and just complex scenes. I'm looking for scene complexity because there's very, very few scenarios that are like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do that. Let me take that back. There are definitely scenarios where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do that, but we always figure out a way to make the look the way that we want. We have, you develop some confidence over time and a pretty good system at that. The only one that's really thrown me off was like a whole vast city at night and doing interior lights for all the different buildings. That one was a little bit tricky just in the renderer that we were using because we didn't actually have a GUI. And so you couldn't place lights into buildings. You had to, it was a goofy system and and basically we had this whole city, but they were turning on and off buildings in different sections. So you couldn't just place the lights once and forget them from shot to shot. So we had to build a procedural system that like recognized what building it was and which windows they were, and then put a randomized function to change the lights on it. That was complicated, but we figured it out. And like I said, on Spies in Disguise, we had a lot of police sirens and things like that. That like getting that stuff to tie to the cars and get the timing of the lights right, because you're flashing red and blue a lot. And if you flash them both at the same time, it just looks magenta and kind of pink. So that isn't right. But from my standpoint, from a feature film level, I look for complexity. Anytime there's like a stadium of people, anytime it's like, and the camera pulls out of the forest and you see them out and you know that like you're going to have to go from fine detail out to something big, that's a red flag to me. From a student project, if you're working on a thesis or an animated short yourself, like just general complexity. Lots and lots of characters will slow people down, and multiple locations will definitely slow you down. Those are the two that I look for on student projects. I usually, making an animated short is hard already. Even if it's just like one character in one set piece and just performing there, that is hard to do. I always see these people who are like, oh, I've got to get this thing done in 6 months. Here's my idea. Okay, this guy is a little boy, and then he becomes a teenager, then he becomes a grown-up, and then he's in the shopping mall, and then he goes and he drives down the highway. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, you've got him in all these different places with all these different like crowds of people and all these different, like maybe just simplify and have one character in one space. So that would be something I look out for there. Let's see. I'm going to go through the questions that were asked previously, then I'll jump up to the live ones. Peter asked, what's the first few weeks like on the job? Is there training? Thanks. It depends on the company. So if you are working for, like, if you're hired on contract for a commercial house and you've got like a 6-week contract to just knock out this one commercial, there's usually not. Like, there's usually just like, okay, there's your spot. There's your coworker. This is our render farm. Make it go. And then you go from there. Bigger studios will often have training plans because they are investing in you in a longer term setup. You'll either be assigned like a mentor. I'm actually working on Blue Sky's global training plan right now. I know Disney has a really strong training plan. Pixar does as well. And we are getting up to that level where it's like, yeah, when you come in, you go through a common training plan to get to where you need to go. The biggest thing about starting your job is that I always tell people that there's a few things that you want to do your first few weeks on the job. And because like I said, the training will come and go from the different studios. A few of the biggest things to do, because your first few weeks are so crucial. you will never have that opportunity again to make that first impression at the company. And like I said, I've been at the studio for 11 years. I guarantee you there are people that still think of me the same way they did in those first few weeks in 2008. Because that's just how people work. Like you form your opinion of people pretty quickly. So things you want to do: don't be late, show up on time, be punctual. I always say the first few weeks you want to have a notepad like glued to your hand. Everywhere you go, you want to just write stuff down. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give is to always, because one of the best impressions that you can make on somebody is that they only need to tell you something once. So if you're starting as a lighter and you go to your supervisor or lead or the director or the art director or CG soup or whoever is running the show on your project, and they give you notes or they give you advice or they walk you through something, take notes, because the best way that you can show competency is to only be told something once and then figure it out. The worst is like if you have to go back and be like, hey, I know you already explained this to me once, but could you explain this to me again? It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's like they're like, I already said this to you. It's like when you go to a restaurant and a waiter doesn't write anything down and then they mess up your order and you're like, oh, I knew it. And they didn't write that down. Why didn't they? But if they write it down, then you give them a little more leeway. Same thing with work. Just take notes, especially because there's going to be jargon and new terms that are going to be thrown at you all the time. And it's really important to just kind of jot those down. The other piece of advice that I give, which is definitely going to, because like all this stuff is altering and changing as we speak with more remote onboarding. And this one's tricky. I always tell people this too, because I've seen this bite people in the butt. Your first few weeks on the job, don't be sarcastic. This is going to sound so silly, but don't be sarcastic in any written format, be it an email or Slack or whatever, because people don't know you yet. And although in your head, like a sarcastic thing or a jokey kind of a thing is like, it's clear, but if they don't know you and don't have a good relationship with you, it may just come off as being kind of like a jerk. So don't do any sarcasm early on. Make sure you have a notepad glued to your hand. What do I also tell people? Be on time. Listen more than you speak. And I had another one that it just slipped my mind. I know. So when you're first starting in a company, the best way to impress people is to be fast. A mistake that people often make is they, like, let's say they're assigned 5 shots right out of the gate. They think that they have to make, like, they just need to make, if they just make one of them look like just blow people away with that one, then people are really going to like their work. And all that's going to do is lead to people wondering, what about the other 4? Because generally speaking, when you're first starting out at a company, they're not going to give you the most important shots. They're going to give you some I don't want to say filler shots, but just like, they want you to just knock them out. Your productivity is based on your speed. So getting 5 shots to a point of being good is so much better than getting 2 shots to the point of being great. You know what I mean? Like, you just get them at a level and just show that you're like, can rapid turnaround. And then when they give you notes, make sure you hit the notes. Last point. Okay. Last point on that one. When you're given notes on a shot, and especially early on, and actually just like throughout your career, if you're given notes on a shot, but you think that like doing something else would make the shot look better, always do the notes they ask you first. Do those notes, and then maybe if you have time to do a secondary version of your idea, then great. But never, if they're like, hey, make the main character brighter and the background darker, and you're like, okay, and then you show up the next time and you're like, hey, I heard you, but what I did was I made the character darker and the background brighter. It doesn't matter how good it looks. They're just going to be thinking to themselves, wait, this person didn't listen to me. So make sure that and then if you show them first the version that they asked for, they're going to give you a lot more leeway the second time around. So let's see. Abhishek and Trent, we're talking here. So the question was, what should we see before applying to any company? And Trent answered this because I was a little confused by the question, but what you should do when you're, and it turned out it was like, what should you study about a company? Study what their past projects, study, feel free to look at like, what is it? Glassdoor, Glass Ceiling. I think it's Glassdoor. Look at people's reviews of companies, but it's so important to know that the work that they've done, if it's public knowledge, you can look at the project that they're currently working on, but definitely do a little research before you showed up. I did an interview with somebody and I couldn't even tell you what year it was. I couldn't tell you much about them except for that they complimented us on our work on How to Train a Dragon. And we were like, thank you so much. They're like, oh, I love that movie. You know, it was just so much fun and the colors are so great. We're like, yeah, we liked it too. I mean, we didn't do it, but like, yeah, it was great. and I'm not saying that's why the person didn't get a job, but it's like the one thing I remember about that interview. So you definitely don't want to compliment a company on work they didn't do, or and it just shows a lack of preparation. The other one that I always tell people is come into interviews with some questions about the company. You know, like what would my role be? What project would I be working on? Just like general questions that you should have for them about like maybe the area, like, you know, hey, this office is located here, but I want to live here. Is there like public transportation between the two? Or just like something to show that you're prepared, that you have something written down and that you're ready to go. So hopefully that answers that one. So Samuel asks, hi, Michael. So I've always wondered, do some animation studios hire lighters with particular lighting styles? Say something that's highly stylized or more grounded in naturalism. Thanks. And stay safe. Thank you, Sam. You stay safe too. It depends on the project that they're working on. So if you break what we do down to a very, very basic level, companies pay us to make images that people pay money to see. So we, and depending on the project that they're making, they're going to look for artists with a particular skill set for that film, for that particular project. If you're like when Sony was looking for like Into the Spider-Verse, I'm sure they were looking for people with film, like with all CG scenes on their reel, but they were probably looking for people with more stylized stuff, versus when they were hiring for when a company was hiring for like The Adventures of Tintin, that was more realism. They were probably looking for more realism. But the thing is, and this comes with the researching the company, you have to craft your demo reel to the job that you're applying to. So if you're applying to an animation house and you have a bunch of shots that are integrating CG elements into a live action background, they don't really care about that. That won't land you that job there. So what you want to do is you want to tailor your reel for that job, because you're asking this company, you're like, hey, I can do this. Will you pay me to do this? And they need to know that the work that you're doing is relevant to the work that they need you to do down the road. You need to prove that you have the skills to do that job. So that's kind of that. So it's more on you to accommodate your reel to the company. And the other thing, and this came up in our interview with the head recruiter at Blue Sky, it came up like 3 or 4 times. So I want to reiterate this when it comes to like demo reels and all that. And because she kept talking about make sure that only your best work is on your reel. Even if it makes the reel a little bit shorter, that's fine. No one expects you, like, especially if you're just starting in this industry, no one expects you to have a longer reel. In fact, they have to look through a lot of them. So anything less than, like a couple minutes is totally fine. Even just less than a minute, even if it's just like 2 or 3 projects, that's totally fine. But make sure that they are your best work, because lots of times you'll be evaluated not by the best thing on your reel, but by the worst. Because this is a demonstration of what you can do. So always make sure that the work that you have on there is your absolute best. Okay. So Asha says, oh, thank you, Sarah. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I find that 3D opportunities are fairly limited. So have been a freelancer with a few gigs here and there. At junior levels, it seems hard to find a remote employee opportunity. Do you think it will get better after this, and will studios be more open? Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any way of moving forward in the industry and what we do without remote employees. This is my personal take. This isn't based on anything because nobody knows the future. But there are companies like Twitter who in New York just announced that all their employees can work from home forever. And all of these companies, if they're trying to stay productive now, are forced into finding remote solutions for people. Now, I don't think that, there's not going to be some magical switch that turns that off. They're going to have that solution now. And I think that it only makes sense that moving forward, at least for the next year or two, that companies are going to be at least looking for some remote work, if not exclusively looking for remote work. And that has its challenges in itself. Like, how do you become accustomed to a culture at a new company if you never physically meet the people? I don't know. That's something we'll have to definitely figure out. But yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Some other, so I think I got all the questions. Oh yeah. I'm sorry, I just read a thank you and I responded like you guys could see the same thing that I was saying. So feel free to add some more questions if you have them here, but I will just go through a couple other like little tidbits of advice that I give people. So interviewing. The one piece of advice that somebody gave me a long, long time ago that I always share with people is, before you walk into an interview, convince yourself that you're just meeting an old friend. That you're meeting a friend that you haven't seen in 10 years, 15 years, whatever. And bring that energy with you into the room. Because everyone says, hey, just be yourself in there. Don't worry about it. Just be yourself. Be fine. Be natural. But like, most of the time, you have worked so hard to get to this moment. And you know that you're walking into a room where people are judging you, and like you're nervous and you're unsure of yourself. And it's like going on a first date with somebody. It sucks. It's like you don't it's like you have to put yourself out there. You don't know so basically, if you just treat yourself, you treat the situation like you're just like seeing an old friend, you'll come in with warmth, you'll come in with kindness, you'll come in a little bit looser. And this is another big one. If you're in an interview, lots of times they'll ask you a question that they don't expect you to know the answer to, because they want to see how you react to not knowing something. So this came up in an interview that we did too, with what's like the number one mistake that someone makes in an interview, and it's just lying. Like saying you know the answer to something when you don't, saying you did something on your reel that you didn't. That leads me to another story of somebody I know who was got a demo reel, like said, hey, this person's coming in for an interview. They have this cool stuff. They have this work from DreamWorks on their reel. And the person looked at the reel and was like, no, actually, I was the lighter on that. That wasn't, it was at a different company. And he was like, yeah, no, I didn't, that person, I don't know who that person is, but I definitely lit that shot. So the person came in, it was kind of too late to cancel it. They did the interview. And when that question came up, that interviewee, like, it was like, hey, so I have to ask, you put this on your reel, but I lit that. What was your association with that shot? The person literally got up and just ran out of the room and like ran across the parking lot. So, and that person never got a job, because that story spread because it's a good story, but like that person never got a job in the industry and is now working in a different industry. So always be honest, and always, if you don't know something, just say, I don't know. And it's totally fine. Especially if you're saying something like, you know what, I don't really know, but I can get back to you on that. That's a very, very good answer to things. The other thing, and my dad actually taught me this one. So he ran a general contracting company for a long time. And he said that one question that he would ask people would be like, how soon can you start, when they had another job? And if they answered, oh, I can start first thing Monday morning, that was a red flag for him. That was actually a negative answer for him, because he knows that if you treat your previous employer poorly, you're going to treat your future employer poorly. So if in doing that, that person's saying, I don't need to give my old job notice, I can just drop them and go, and I'll be here on Monday. He knows that the person will do that to him the next time around. So always show your previous employer respect and say like, hey, when can you start? You would say like, I need at least 2 weeks to make sure that I can transition someone from my current role in the next one. It just makes you look more responsible. Another thing, and man, I could talk about this literally all day. I promise I won't. But another thing with applying for a job is people ask me about like their social media stuff and their online presence and whether that matters. Yeah, totally. Of course, if we're close to hiring somebody, of course, we're going to Google their name. Of course, we're going to see like public profile stuff and see what they have out there. And people would ask me like, oh, should I take down like pictures of me at a party or pictures? And I was like, no, I mean, that stuff's fine. What we care about is whether you're a negative person, whether you're on there complaining about your old jobs, whether you're on there just like complaining about the weather. If you're just like a negative Nancy, like nobody wants to work with that. We have to spend 8 hours with you at a minimum every day. We want somebody who's positive, who's going to be a positive person, someone who's social and all that good stuff. That's my take on it. And I remember, yeah, there was somebody who even on their website, they were like, their landing page was like, okay, this is my website. Click here for business and click here for personal. And I remember we looked at each other and we're like, of course the personal one. Like, who's bored enough to click the business one? So we just wanted to find out more about the person. Last thing on that is there was a question about networking that came up. And one of the things about networking that's very important is that this is a small industry. Your reputation will follow you around the whole time. So I've been out of school for, like I said, 13 years now or something. And people will still ask me like, hey, it looks like you went to, like, they know I went to grad school at the Savannah College of Art and Design. And they're like, hey, this person went there at the same time. What do you think of them? And I'll remember back to, oh, you know, I was on a group project with them and they just totally dropped the ball on me. And that matters even many years later to people. We get it all the time, you know, at the Academy of Animated Art. We have lots of people who are applying for jobs, and friends will call me and be like, hey, this person was a student of yours. What do you think? And I will definitely, you know, and I take referrals extraordinarily seriously. It's my reputation online, especially if I'm going to give someone a referral. I want to, it's almost like an extension of myself. I'm vetting them and putting myself on the line for them. So I always want to make sure to be honest. But that being said, when somebody is good, I will sing their praises to the moon and back, because I think that good people deserve a shot, and I will fight for you in that position. Oh, Taylor had some questions here. If you only have 1 or 2 different films on your demo reel as a student, do recruiters expect to see a different range, or do they prefer to see a larger mix of different films? The number one thing that they're going to look for, I always say for an animation studio, make sure that you have character work on your reel. That's mainly what we're doing. Our stories are character based. So I would always focus on making sure that at least you have some character work on your reel. And then I think it would be, make sure. I think if you have only 1 or 2 projects on your reel, I think that's totally fine. The one thing I would say, if you can, because this is like a really powerful one for a demo reel, is if you can take one of the shots from one of those projects and light it like 3 different ways with 3 different moods and 3 different lighting scenarios, that'll go a long way. So you don't necessarily need to develop a whole new scene or you can work with what you have to make your reel a little bit more. But 1 or 2 films on a demo reel from a student is not bad at all. I've seen people who have just like a really strong thesis project get jobs based on that. So that's a very, very good question. But the biggest one is that if let's say you have two student films and one of them is great and one of them's just okay, only put the great one on there, or like shots from the great one on there. And remember too that depending on the setup, like it doesn't, you can make modifications to shots just for your demo reel if it was like a student project or something, because lots of times if you're lighting a short, you kind of are tied to a certain lighting scheme. But if you're like, hey, the shot's really cool, but it would look better if like it would look slightly different, make it look slightly different and put it on your reel, because you're not seeing the whole animated short there, you're just seeing individual shots. Let's see. Also, is it okay to just have lighting stills of an environment, or should we focus on mostly animated pieces that we lit? Stills are fine. Having at least one animated shot on there is good, just because it shows that you can deal with noise and render artifacts and that kind of a thing. But you don't, if you're just doing an environment, feel free to just like slightly like zoom the camera in a little bit. Like that's a really good one. Shane Sternstein, who's one of our students who got a job at DreamWorks, he has a really good reel that he has on ArtStation. I'm gonna pull that up here and I'll put that on here so you can kind of see what, like how to kind of, let me do this. So not that I'm encouraging you guys to click on a link during my live thing, but click on that link that I just posted, and check out his demo reel. He's got some really good like soft camera movements in his environment. And again, this was a reel that he used to get lighting, his first job with no experience in the industry at DreamWorks. So, and again, like it's just like strong lighting work. There's not, I don't think there's even an animated character in it. I think it's all static scenes. But you should check that out. And it's a really, really strong reel that doesn't require a huge amount of pizzazz. It's just strong, solid work. And asking for a friend, do you think it will get any easier to hire international applicants now that we are working remotely, or are visas even more difficult now that borders are closed? Sorry for the clickbait. So now I wasn't laughing at the question. Never mind. So visas are still going to be a thing. I think to tell you the truth, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I do know that, yeah, working remotely and visas, that's a really, really, really good question. I know that the closed border thing did mess up some of the people that I work with, because they were talking about like canceling all green cards, and it got kind of crazy here in the States there for a little bit, and that messed with some people that were international. I think that the visa process will have to remain the same, because you're still being paid for work you're doing in that country. But I don't know how that one's going to play out. I think that borders will open up. I think borders will open faster than remote work will go away. So I think that people will be, but they still have to meet the requirements in order to hire internationally on a visa. They still have to like prove that there's no one locally that they can hire and go through all that. So I don't think it'll change that much. I do think it'll make it much more likely that I could, like, sitting in New York, I would be much more willing to do work for a company in Ireland or, Kuwait or somewhere else, because I could do the work there. But I don't think it'll ease the visa restrictions. I just think it'll make it more likely that you will want to work at a different place, because it may be in a place that you don't want to live, but you'll be happy to do work for them. So, okay, I think that's all the questions for right now. You're very welcome, Taylor. My pleasure. If anybody else has anything, I'll just hang out here for another 2 minutes and give, my pleasure, Sarah. Thank you. And I'll give any other advice that I can. For the demo reel, there's one thing that comes up often, and it's like whether or not you should include like drawings or your traditional artwork or photography or anything like that. I'm always like, whenever I see those, unless they're extraordinary, I'm always like, okay, that's fine. I think it helps tell a little bit of a story about yourself, but I don't think it's not going to make or break you getting a job, except if the work is exceptional. Like if it like really goes above and beyond, if you really, really have strong skill in an area, definitely show it off. But if it's just like, oh, I did this thing in my drawing class in college, I would generally leave that off. Because again, unless it's directly related to the skill that you need to get the job, I wouldn't put it on the reel. But that's just me. And yeah, and then last thing for interviews, like I said, treat it like it's a old um, it's an old friend that you're just meeting, because usually when you're in the door and you're interviewing, they've already looked at your work and they've already recognized that you have the skill to do the job. Now they're just seeing if you're somebody that they would like to work with. And oh, and the last thing, okay, this is honest to God the last one that I'll give. If you don't get a job, this is a tough one to end on. I should have ended on one that was a little more positive. If you do not get a job, do not take it personally at all. I've seen a bunch of situations where interviewed somebody, really, really liked them, but for reasons outside of that candidate's control, we could not offer them a job. It would be something like, we're interviewing people, then all of a sudden our bosses come to us and say, you know what, we had the budget for an additional headcount, but we needed to allocate that to a different department. So there's no longer a lighting position available. And so that person just isn't going to get the job because the job isn't there anymore. There have been situations where you have 3 openings, you've done 15 interviews, you've identified 3 people that you like, you've extended offers, and you just kind of keep doing interviews in case one of those 3 people turns down the offer. So you could give the best interview in the world and be a perfect candidate, but because offers have already been extended, you're not going to get that job if those people say yes. So the biggest part is, don't think that because you didn't get a job, it was because of you or your work. I would say like 50% of the time, it's totally outside of your control. So don't beat yourself up. The main thing is that, remember, your career is long. It feels like when you're first starting out that everything is like your window of time is like condensed and tightened, but you realize that lots of times in order to get a job, you have to interview. You end up interviewing like 3 times before you get the job. Or the person that you interview with at one company remembers you when they go to another company and they contact you. So remember that you're playing the long game here. And so setting up a good interview at one place is just going to roll into opportunities down the road. All right. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will try and do these every Wednesday, give them a trot for a couple of weeks and see if you guys like them. But in the meantime, keep asking questions and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions to get you guys into the industry. So again, I got to remember to change. I don't know if it's on this side or this side. My little Jasmine Katatakarn name, it's down there. Again, that's just me. It's like she sponsored this. So Jasmine has sponsored that off in the corner. My name is Mike Tanzillo. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. Have a good night, everyone.